very significant guest speaker is in front of us. I would like to welcome at HCCP Mr. Nick Middleton. Welcome. Nick is a researcher and traveler and geographer who also teaches at Oxford University, and he's author of many very interesting and significant books. And one of them that you can also get here at HCPP, also in Czech translation, is called A Little Atlas of Countries That Don't Exist. And the same topic is a theme of his talk, where he's going to talk about countries and micronations that try to achieve an opting out of countries they are part of and have different struggles with that. And Nick is going to select a couple of examples of that are relevant for our Congress. So thank you very much that you accepted invitation, and pass the word.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. I'm very pleased to be here in Praha for the first time in more than 30 years, I have to say. I was here in 1989 by mistake. I happened to see the first day of the first evening of the Velvet Revolution, as it turned out. But this evening, I'm going to give you a talk based on a recent book of mine called An Atlas of Countries That Don't Exist. And in the next 40 minutes, I hope to introduce you to a few places that you may never have heard of. I want to outline to you what it is to be a country, what a country actually means, and it's by no means straightforward. And also give you some tips for starting your own country, should you so desire, although the tips do not come with any guarantees of success. So, I'm a geographer. Let's start with a map. That's the conventional world political map that we are all familiar with. And it's designed by the countries shown there to give you the impression that every square meter of the Earth's land surface is accounted for. Those solid, nice blocks of color indicate that Argentina is in charge of that part of South America. Namibia owns and controls this part, so on and so forth. But I would suggest to you that this map is actually a bit of a confidence trick, because what this map conceals is almost as many countries that would like to appear on the map, but do not. Countries that would like to join the elite group of nation states that have representation at the United Nations. And I think it's fair to point out that this map is by no means static. In the last 30 years or so, there's been quite a big series of changes, so that at the end of the Soviet Union, for example, gave birth to 15 new countries. In the early 1990s, some countries became reunited, so Germany and Yemen in 1990. 3 years later, as we all know, we were standing in Czechoslovakia, and then suddenly it became Czech Republic as Slovakia split off. A similar thing happened in Ethiopia in the same year when Eritrea took over the portion in the Red Sea. And more new countries have appeared in the 21st century in Asia, in Europe, and in Africa. So the world political map is a changeable feast. It's by no means static. If you go back to the beginning of the 20th century, Europe politically looked very different from the Europe we know today. So there was a Russian Empire. Germany was very much larger than it is now. Of course, there was Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, and Northern Africa was all controlled by European powers. Fast forward 100 years to the beginning of the 21st century, all of those empires have more or less disappeared. The Northern African margin, they're all independent nation states. So the map has changed quite dramatically in that period of 100 years. And of course, the map continues to change. We all know we're members of the European Union. I might not be in a very short time, but the European Union, in a sense, has been designed to do away with some of the powers associated with individual nation states. And we hear a lot about globalization and the end of the nation state. So national boundaries matter relatively little within the EU to the movement of investment and goods. It's rather different if you're a person or a migrant trying to get in, but to investment and goods, national boundaries don't mean that much anymore. National governments also compete with a range of other organizations such as global transnational corporations, non-governmental organizations that also have a global reach. And of course, we know about the transnational networks fueled by information technology. If I WhatsApp one of you in the crowd, it really doesn't matter what country I'm WhatsApping from or which country you are in. And therefore, there's been a lot of movement towards this idea of globalization spelling the end of the nation state. So, is it the end of the nation state? Are these the early stages of that process? I would suggest perhaps not quite just yet. So, the United Kingdom have decided to withdraw from the European Union and re-establish its national credentials. And of course, the United Kingdom, I've lost count of the number of times I've tried to explain how the United Kingdom works to people who are unfamiliar with it. Scotland is part of the United Kingdom, but they had a referendum in 2014 about leaving the United Kingdom. So by no means is the UK done and dusted. And then there are other aspects, non-political aspects, for which being member of a country is still very important. So this Brazilian crowd, if they weren't part of Brazil, they wouldn't feel that national identity as a football crowd as they do for any other unit. So the end of the nation state, probably it's not quite yet as we speak. This is an interesting question. As a geographer, I should be able to answer it, but it's actually rather difficult, surprisingly difficult. So there are 195 members of the United Nations. Actually, that's not quite true. There are 193 UN member states plus 2 UN observer states. However, there are 206 Olympic nations, 206 national Olympic committees. If you look at football, soccer, the world's biggest game, there are 209 FIFA countries. And then if you look at the ISO, the International Standards Organization, which is a transnational body that maintains standards for all sorts of things, there are no fewer than 249 country codes. So you ask yourself this question, how many countries are there? And it's actually surprisingly difficult to answer. Here's another surprisingly different question to answer. What is a country? Or what is a nation? Or what is a state? And often those three words are used more or less interchangeably. And sometimes they're bolted together, so you hear talk about the nation state. Well, for different people, they're different things. I mean, colleagues of mine at Oxford who are interested in cultural geography use the word nation as a token of cultural assimilation, so people who speak a common language and have other common aspects of culture. For an economist, a state is different again. If you're a member of a football crowd, again, you may be different. And although there are many different definitions, they're all full of anomalies and exceptions. And when it comes down to it, there is no universally accepted common definition of what makes a country, which might surprise you. You might think that membership of the United Nations should be the gold standard because it's the club for sovereign states. If you're a sovereign state and you're a member of the United Nations, there's no question you're a country. Well, yes, and then again, no. Israel became a member of the UN in 1949, but a large number of countries don't recognize the existence of Israel. They just don't recognize that it exists at all. Likewise, Palestine more recently has become a UN observer state, but an even larger number of countries don't recognize the existence of Palestine. And then there's my own country. Now, I was born in England. I have a UK passport, but England, from the perspective of the United Nations, is not a country. It only has a seat at the United Nations as a member of the United Kingdom. And the United Kingdom is made up of England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. And then there's another anomalous situation called Taiwan. Now, for a long time, Taiwan had the UN seat for China. There's only one China. Everyone agrees on the fact that there's only one China, Taiwan and mainland China. And up until the 70s, the 1970s, Taiwan had that UN seat for China. And then in 1971, all the other UN member states decided that actually it shouldn't be Taiwan at all, it should be mainland China. So they kicked Taiwan out. So is Taiwan a country? I bet, I haven't checked this up, I should have done, I bet Czech Republic does not have an embassy in Taiwan. The UK doesn't. Most countries do not have embassies there. They don't recognize it as a country because they don't want to upset mainland China. That's not to say that they don't have trade delegations which behave suspiciously like embassies, but nonetheless, technically, they do not recognize Taiwan. There is a small handful of states that do. They tend to be very small, often island states who get big handouts from Taiwan for maintaining diplomatic relations. But there are many more states who do not recognize Taiwan as a country. So even UN membership is by no means clear-cut. Now, in legal terms, there's this convention called the Montevideo Convention on the Rights and Duties of States, and it was created in the 1930s. And Article 1 has a series of criteria for statehood. So to be a state, you need a permanent population, you need a defined territory, you need some form of government, and the capacity to enter into relations with the other states. And that's pretty woolly. But nonetheless, in legal terms, this is recognized by most nation states. So let's have a look at an example. Northern Cyprus. So up until the mid-70s, or in the 60s and early 70s, this place, Varosha, was the place to be seen on the beach in the Mediterranean. It was where all the glitterati, the Hollywood stars, went to sunbathe. And then in 1974, everything changed because there was the arrival of some Turkish armed forces. And notice I said arrival. So as you probably know, Cyprus is split in community-wise between Turkish Cypriots and Greek Cypriots. To Turkish Cypriots, these people, these troops, liberated their land. To Greek Cypriots, they were invaders. Either way, however you look at it, in 1974, everything changed. And there was a mass movement of Greek Cypriots from the north to the south, and Turkish Cypriots moved to northern Cyprus. And this line between them became, in 1974, a no-go zone. And it's still a no-go zone. So the best beach on Cyprus has not had any sunbathers on it since 1974. It's a no-go zone. That's what it looks like. Occasionally, photographers manage to creep in and take some shots. That's the main street of Russia in the late 60s. There it is. I think that photo was taken in the early 2000s. Everything stopped, so that's a car showroom with all the latest mid-70s models. So that's the boundary. You can move between the two, but there's this forbidden zone between them. Nonetheless, if you want to, you can go to North Cyprus for your holiday still. You can't go to that beach, but there are other beaches, don't worry. You can send a postcard home from Northern Cyprus with a North Cypriot stamp. There is a choice of 2 guidebooks in English. You can't use Northern Cypriot money. It's the currency they use is the Turkish lira. And that's because Turkey recognizes Northern Cyprus, but no one else does. You can't fly there directly other than from Istanbul. So if you wanted to go on holiday to Northern Cyprus, you either have to fly to the south and then cross the border, or you fly via Istanbul into the Northern Cyprus. So other than Turkey, no one recognizes Northern Cyprus as a country. So according to the Montevideo Convention, it is a state because it's got a population, it's got a territory, it's got a government, and it has the capacity to enter into relations with other governments and other states, such as Turkey. But no one else recognizes it. Is it a country? I don't know. There's another article in the Montevideo Convention that says the political existence of the state is independent of recognition by other states. So actually, you don't have to have recognition by anyone. You can just say, right, I've got a territory, people, government, and the capacity to enter into relations. That's it. I don't actually have to talk to anyone. And yet, that recognition has become the sort of gold standard by which states like to think of themselves as proper states, by being recognized by other states. And for that reason, there are a number of sort of mutual recognition clubs that have been set up by unrecognized countries. So there's this, the shortened form is the Commonwealth of Unrecognized States, for splinters of what was the Soviet Union. And then these two at the bottom are much larger organizations, the UUN, so it's a deliberate play on the United Nations, as is its logo, and UMPO. Both have 20, 30 more member states, member non-states, I don't know how you put it, but there are a number of these clubs for mutual recognition of non-countries. In sporting terms too, there are a number of non-FIFA World Cups. We all know how corrupt FIFA is, so it's good to hear that there are a number of other ones. There's a Viva World Cup currently held by Kurdistan, which beat Northern Cyprus 2-1 in the final. There's a Fifi Wild Cup, also actually held by Northern Cyprus in this case. And there's perhaps the biggest one is the CONIFA World Cup, which was played out, I think, earlier this year, actually. And in that case, Northern Cyprus lost 3-2 on penalties in the final to Karpatalia, which is a splinter of what most people know as Hungary. So there are lots of these parallel organizations for non-countries. So I had to come up with some sort of rule of thumb for inclusion within my atlas. You know, what do I and what don't I regard to be a non-country? And I ended up deciding that I'd have to follow the Montevideo Convention to some extent. So some form of government, a claim to territory, a flag, because a flag is symbolically very important for countries and would-be countries, and some sort of seriousness of purpose. And I put that in my mind because there are a lot of joke countries around. People declare independence for their back garden and their front room and so on. And I didn't include those. And yet I still had 50 to put in my book, and I could have filled it several times over. In addition to those, on the negative side, I didn't want places with a UN seat, so I didn't include Israel and Palestine because for a number of reasons, but not least of which, there are more countries that do recognise those two places as countries than do not, and therefore a lack of widespread international recognition. But as I say, I was spoilt for choice. When people talk about countries and states, there's also an inherent understanding of the fact that states, governments, exercise power and authority. They set standards, they issue passports, they maintain law and order, so they issue rules and regulations, and they also patrol borders in many cases to keep people out, in some cases to keep their own population in. But this exercise of power is undoubtedly part of the makeup of being a country. So what happens then in a country where there is no exercise of power, where it's a complete free-for-all? Let's go to Somalia. Now, since the mid-1980s, so a very long time, that so-called country of Somalia has been a byword for chaos, for civil war, for famine, for the complete breakdown of law and order. But, and in the Western media, that's all we hear about, there is a large slab of Somalia called Somaliland, which in 1990 declared independence from the rest of Somalia, based on the fact that it had been a British protectorate pre-1960, and the other slab of Somalia had been Italian, and Somaliland actually declared independence as a country in 1960 for 6 days, by which time they decided actually they'd join with the rest of Somalia. But they had a really rough time of the central government in Mogadishu, who sent MiG fighters in to bomb Hargeisa. In the 80s, there was a civil war, so on and so forth. And to cut a long story short, Somaliland, which declared independence in 1991, has been a haven of peace and tranquility, while all of the rest of the country, as I say, has been a byword for chaos. So Somaliland has its own currency, it registers its own vehicles, it has biometric passports, and this gentleman here is Mohamed Sulanyo, who is was their democratically elected president. They've had several. So, since 1991, it's been a haven of tranquility, well organised, virtually no warfare at all, in complete contrast to the rest of the country. And yet, no one will recognise them. No one. Everyone still labours under, or everyone, the international community, still labours under the delusion that Somalia is one country. But de facto, it's simply not. Let's have a slightly different example. So, as you saw, Somaliland was large. Hutt River ain't. It's small. It's a micronation. It's in Western Australia. And yet, it's been around for a long time. In 1970, this husband and wife declared independence for their wheat farm in Western Australia. Why? Because they had been told by the central government in Canberra that they had to produce less wheat, or at least they couldn't sell as much wheat as they had been producing. They did their sums and realised quite quickly that actually they weren't going to make ends meet if they weren't allowed to sell as much wheat as they had been before. So they challenged it in the courts. They went through all sorts of legitimate avenues to try and change this switch to their wheat quota. All to no avail. So in April 1970, they said, right, we're not part of Australia anymore. We're going to call ourselves the Hutt River Province. Now, you can imagine that if this happens on your watch as a national government, it's just annoying, isn't it? To begin with, a central government tends to take no notice about this sort of thing, hoping that they'll just go away. Of course, in this case, they didn't go away. Hutt River Province has a really good website It's chock full of all sorts of documents which have been leaked to them by sympathisers. Here's one from 1976. So 6 years after they declared independence. And it's a restricted cablegram of legal advice to the Department of Foreign Affairs in Australia. You probably can't read it, but essentially what it's saying is that by declaring independence, these people haven't broken any Australian laws. So they've done nothing illegal. So it's still there, but they can't get them in the courts. A year later, they'd introduced their own currency. And this is a confidential memo to the Australian Cabinet from 1977. Again, legal advice saying, yeah, they've introduced their own currency, but again, they haven't actually broken any laws. So time moves on, gradually different government departments take up the case, drop it, and I bet you can imagine which one was the absolute last one to keep going to the bitter end. The tax authorities. So every year, the Caisleys got sent a tax demand, personal tax demand, until 2006, when Leonard Casey received this letter from the tax authority. It's his income tax return. And I've highlighted the main bit of it, which says additional information. You have been deemed to be a non-resident of Australia for income tax purposes. No tax, blah, blah, blah. So he doesn't live in Australia. In which case, where does he live? Hutt River Province, a different country. And this letter has been given pride of place on the wall of the post office in Hutt River Province for obvious reasons. So they had a piece of paper that, I mean, of course, they're not recognised by the Australian government, but that piece of paper rather suggests otherwise. So Hutt River Province is still going. It's nearly 50 years old. You can visit it. You need to take your passport, of course, but they'll stamp it for you. And it makes ends meet by selling stamps and sort of presentation packs of their currency and various other knickknacks. It also still sells some wheat and some lupins, which is a fodder crop. And you can also register your company in Hutt River for a cheaper price than registering it in Australia. And as I say, it's nearly 50 years old, so it's been there for a jolly long time. Now, for Hutt River, having this piece of paper from the tax authorities was a real victory. But having a piece of paper doesn't always give you victory. I'll detail a much sadder example of Lakota, which, as you can see, is a great big area of territory slap bang in the northern center of the United States of America. And it's the homeland for the Lakota Sioux. Now, the Lakota Sioux had a piece of paper. They had a treaty with the US government in 1868 in which it said quite categorically that this land had been set apart for the absolute and undisturbed use and occupation of the Indians herein named, the Lakota Sioux. Unfortunately for them, just a few years later, gold was discovered in the Black Hills. So all bets are off. However, the Lakota Sioux are proud people. The Black Hills are sacred territory to them, so they fought it. They fought it on the battlefield and in the courts. And about 100 years later, they won. And the Indian Claims Commission ruled that taking the Black Hills was unconstitutional under the Fifth Amendment. Needless to say, the US government appealed, and a year later, again, it was upheld, and the Court of Claims, the judge said, a more ripe and rank case of dishonorable dealings will never, in all probability, be found in our history. They compensated the Sioux, the Lakota Sioux, and it was backdated with interest. And in the late 90s, it had this sum of money had reached $500 million. And the Lakota Sioux said, no, thank you. we'll just have our land back, please. Because it's sacred territory and it's not for sale. You can imagine what good it did them. So, in 2007, a group of Lakota Sioux marched on Washington, D.C., and formally withdrew from that treaty. And these people, they're very proud, but they're also very poor. The unemployment rate in the Lakota reservations is something like 60%. The literacy rate is also very low. It's something like 45%. They're dirt poor. They could, and there aren't many of them, so this money would go a long way, but they won't take it. Here's a different sort of indigenous people example, this time in Australia. We're back in Australia. And this is more recent. This is the Murawari people who, in 2013, issued this press release. Queen recognises Murawari Republic, Queen being Queen Elizabeth of Britain, because Australia is part of the Commonwealth and their absolute head of state is the Queen of England. But the Murawari had looked into this and wondered why was it that this Queen person a long, long way away was their head of state. And they looked into it and they found out that there are only 3 ways in which she could be legitimately the head of their state. So they wrote her a letter and they said, "Dear Queen, we understand that you think you're head of state of Murawari Republic. We don't, not so sure. We've taken legal advice. There are only 3 ways this could have happened. One, that we signed a treaty with you. No one remembers that happening. 2, we fought a battle and lost. No, can't remember that. Or 3, one of your representatives turned up and claimed our land as terra nullius, i.e. a blank canvas, somewhere where no one lived, and that's ours now, thank you very much. However, the Murawari have lived here for certainly 5,000 years, and quite possibly 10,000 years. There's a famous fish trap that's been dated by archaeologists as between 5,000 and 10,000 years old. So these people have been there a long time. So in their letter, they said to the Queen, look, these are the arguments. Perhaps you know better. Perhaps you'll let us know. But if we know you're a busy lady, if you don't respond within a month, then we'll just take it as read that you do recognise us. And hence this press release from the Murawari Republic. And that case has actually spawned a series of very similar claims by other Aborigine tribes in Australia. Let's come a bit closer to home. Here's an island which is an anomaly in my country. Actually, I say my country, I'm not sure if it is my country. It's called the Isle of Man, and it's a self-governing dependency of the British Crown. It's a very small island, almost midway between Scotland, Wales, England, and Ireland, and Northern Ireland. And it's not part of the United Kingdom, nor is it part of the European Union. It sets its own taxes, decides what people learn in school, so on and so forth. It has the oldest continuously operating parliament anywhere. It's called the Tynwald, and it dates from the 8th century. The Vikings set it up, and it's still going. So the only connection with the UK is that they use pounds. They have passports which look very like ours, but interestingly, it says it's a European Union passport, but they're not part of the European Union. And as an autonomous or semi-autonomous, or however you want to put it, island, it has some rather impressive credentials for democracy. In 1881, they gave the first vote to women in Parliament. Admittedly, at that stage, it was only women who owned property, but nonetheless, it was the first. And in 2006, it was the first nation in Western Europe to lower the voting age to 16. Let's have a look at Mayotte. which is an odd one. Now, we talk about opting out, but Mayotte decided that didn't want to opt out. It's a complicated story, but I'll take you through it. The Comoros were part of France for 150 odd years. 1970s, they started talking about independence. The French set up a referendum, and a lot of people turned out, and it was a resounding vote in favor of independence. Yes, please. Nearly 95% of people, Comoran people, voted that they'd like independence from France. Thank you very much. Except, unfortunately, it wasn't quite so clear-cut. If you look at the geography of the place, now there are 4 islands. Grand Comore, 99.98% yes. Moëlle, 99.92% yes. Anjouan, 99.93% yes. And Mayotte. Ooh. No, thank you very much. We won't be partaking of independence. We'd like to stay in France. And no one expected this, I don't think. The Comores went ahead and declared independence for all 4 islands. There was an uproar. There was a period of a decade or more. Every year at the General Assembly in September, the Comoran president stood up and said, we want our island back. France, of course, being a member of the Security Council, vetoed any attempt to give it back, so on and so forth. Meanwhile, Mayotte, this one island that decided it didn't want to be part of France, was slowly climbing its way up the hierarchy of territorial categories. Until it became an overseas département of France, which means it elects a member of parliament. And then, in 2014, it became part of the European Union. So I don't think it's going back to the Comores anytime soon. So that's a different sort of opting out. I'm nearly finishing up now, but I just want to finish up with 2 different sorts of examples. One is Antarctica, which is a big continent that is governed in a different way, or isn't governed, I don't know. There was this treaty in 1959 where all of the countries that had claimed part of Antarctica, and there were half a dozen plus, there's still an unclaimed section there, but all of these countries who had claimed part of the territory, it has no indigenous population at all, so all of these countries put their claims for sovereignty aside in 1959. And this was declared it was a special continent, it's different, there should be no prospecting for minerals, there should be only tourism and science, and therefore it's governed in a unique and different way. It's a model that perhaps others could look at, because no one country rules its territory. It even has its own internet country code, although I'm assured that none of those websites ending in .aq are in Antarctica. They're all in South America. However, although there's this Antarctic Treaty, which treats it in a uniquely different way, nonetheless, all of the countries that did lay claim still sort of have influence on their segments of territory. So they issue stamps. So there's the UK, there's Argentina, there's Chile, New Zealand, Australia, Norway. So they issue stamps. The UK even issued a special commemorative coin for use only at the British Antarctic Survey base in Antarctica. But, you know, they're supposed to have put these claims to sovereignty to one side, so it's all a bit naughty. And you can imagine that if ever the Antarctic Treaty stops for some reason, these countries will be head of the queue, saying, oh yeah, well actually, yeah, we've been governing it for a long time. So it's different, but only up to a point. And then the last example I want to show you is this place, Elgeland Vargaland, which you've all been to, knowingly or not unknowingly. It was created by 2 Swedish artists in the 1990s, and they fancied setting up their own country, but they hadn't got an army, so what were they to do? They decided that they'd crossed several borders. You probably crossed borders yourself and seen these segments of no man's land. You go from one post through 50 meters, 100 meters, perhaps more, and then to the next border post of the next country. Who owns this bit then? Answer, Elgeland, Vargeland. They claimed all these bits between other nations, as well as all digital territory and other states of existence. So if you've dropped off during this talk or any other talk, you've had a little side trip to Elgeland, Vargeland. And you could therefore apply for a passport. They issue their own passports. Interestingly enough, 10 years after the creation of Elgeland, Vargeland, about 100 passport holders decided to go from Stockholm across to Tallinn in Estonia, only on their Elgeland, Vargeland passports. The idea was that they'd get to Tallinn, be refused entry, sent back to Stockholm, be refused entry, because no one would recognize this passport, and therefore they'd be forever in Elgeland, Vargeland, the space in between. Unfortunately, the joke was on them, because when they got to Tallinn, they were all arrested and their passports were confiscated. And then they sent them back to Stockholm. But nonetheless, it's another idea for organizing territory or non-territory also that you might like to ponder on. And I'm going to finish there. I'll leave you with some flags of other non-countries that appear in the book, which I haven't had time to talk about, and to tell you that if this is your sort of thing, then the book is also available in Czech, and they're selling it outside. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Nick. And before the big show with Golden Auction starts, we still have some time for some questions. So please raise your hand who would like to ask.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your presentation. A short question. Do you know the country Lieberland?
Lieberland, yes, I do, yes.
What do
it
you
was
think?
one of the first ones pointed out to me. I'm sorry I didn't mention it.
What do you think about it? Is it a country? Is it a nation? What do you think? Where can it go?
Well, in a sense it is, in that it's got territory. I don't know if it has a permanent population. It's only a small island, isn't it?
No, it's on the border between Croatia and Serbia.
Yes, I thought it was an island in a river between those two countries.
There, it's a swamp.
It is. It's an island in a river between those two countries. So it has a territory which has been claimed. No doubt there's a government. I don't know if it has a permanent population. This gentleman's shaking his head, so perhaps not. So it's on the borders, but as I've said, there are no hard and fast rules about countries. There's no universal definition. And therefore, there it is, and good luck to it. And some of these non-countries have been around for a very long time, as I say, like Hutt River.
Gentleman in the first row, please.
Thanks for the talk, amazing. I wanted to ask you if you went to some of these places, and in that case, what was your favorite?
Aha, yes. Yes, I have been to some, not all. I've been to a handful, actually. And I think my favorite's Greenland, because it's fantastically beautiful and vast. And of all the 50 in this book, if I had to bet on one becoming an established UN member state, I'd bet on Greenland. Because they've, in the last 30, 40 years, they've taken steps towards complete autonomy. They still get a subsidy from Denmark, but some people say that I think it's the 300th anniversary of the Danes arriving, which is in 2021, could be an auspicious date for independence. We shall see. It depends a lot on the oil price, though.
They are not available for sale, right?
I completely right. Yeah, absolutely right.
Some other questions, please. Paulo, please.
Okay, I have a question. What about Rojava?
Sorry, say again?
Rojava. R-O-J-O-V-A. It's a Kurdish land between North Syria and Turkey. And 5 million people live there. They have no government. It's a completely decentralized land, and like last year we had one guy from he had or 2 years ago he had a presentation about Rojava. So, is it considered to be like a country now, like a independent country? It's between like a North Syria and Turkey.
Well, I mean, that part of the world has also had quite a lot of unpleasantness in recent times, hasn't it? From ISIS, which also tried to create their own country.
Yeah. There are fighters against ISIS, the biggest one.
There you are. And it's also, interestingly enough, on the territory of what was self-declared as Kurdistan in the 1930s.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a part of the world which has attempted to break free of its host nations several times. And all I can say again is only time will tell whether it turns into a fully fledged, recognized country or not.
Thank you for the presentation. I would like to ask you, what about autonomy? So how to achieve autonomy inside the state?
Sorry, could you ask the question again? I didn't.
So how to achieve autonomy inside the state?
How do you achieve autonomy? It's a political process, needless to say, by negotiation. In many cases, it's by historical precedent, and to a large degree, it will depend your relative success. I think, or history tells us, your relative success will depend on what you have. So if you look at somewhere like Avaz or Khuzestan in southwestern Iran, it's an Arabic-speaking segment of Iran where all the rest speak Farsi and they're all Persians. And it was more or less independent for quite a long time until the Persians decided they were going to have it. How did they decide? Because it's full of oil. And it's the most oil-productive part of Iran. So although they'd love to be autonomous, well, it's not going to happen, I don't think, not within my lifetime. So it's a political process by negotiation. But as I said about Greenland, you can have success. Greenland have quite a degree of autonomy.
Gentleman next to the door.
Yeah, thanks for the talk. So in your framework, one criterion was claim to territory. Maybe expand on why, and also if you could offer your outlook for nation states being established in the future that are non-territorial.
There are some non-territorial ones.
For example?
Atlantium is one. Now, it's non-territorial, but it has a territorial base. You know, let's face it, I'd like to be non-territorial, but I can't. Oh yeah, briefly, very briefly. You know, you have to, don't you? But yeah, there are places that claim, as does Helgoland Vargaland, it claimed digital territory. So there are alternatives, and as we know with people talking about who owns outer space, you know, these things are up for grabs and they're up for negotiation. And like anywhere else, it will be either an issue of negotiation or brute force and power.
What about establishing a nation state based on renting land from another nation, let's say for 1,000 years, hypothetically?
I don't think that's happened to my knowledge. You could, yeah, I mean, technically, of course it's possible. You'd always be open to arguments to say that actually you're not autonomous, you're just renting. Actually, an example of that is Christiania in Copenhagen. Because they occupied this, it was a military area in central Copenhagen. And it was just occupied by hippies. Long time ago, can't remember when. Yeah, they now have to pay rent. But recently, and I don't know if the deadline's arrived, but recently the government offered to sell them the territory. I don't know if that's come about, but it was the ultimate paradox because these people were hippies, they weren't into ownership. So, do you want to buy your future or not?
There is a question from gentleman in second row.
Zarados, the islands unclaimed?
Is there land unclaimed? Yes, Antarctica.
Zarados, the island.
Sorry?
Zarados, the island.
Sorry, I didn't understand that bit. There's a part of Antarctica, a big wedge that hasn't been claimed, Oh, it stopped. There we go. Here we go. This bit, that bit of Antarctica has not been claimed by anyone. So get down there.
Hello, this was amazing. I'm wondering, for those non-countries that have a substantial population, how do they integrate with the rest of the world? I mean, how do they do banking? Or how do they integrate with communication networks? Do they have a patron state, let's say, that where they are attached, like Northern Cyprus? Or how does this work? I mean, how, even if they are not recognized, somehow they have to...
Yeah, with difficulty. Sometimes, as you say, they have a patron state. Many have one that recognise them, like Northern Cyprus, like those bits of the Soviet Union are recognised by Russia. But in other cases, they have to do it piecemeal. So Somaliland, they issue their own passports. They're not recognised by any other nation state, but they do have arrangements for recognition of their passports with a number of African countries. So South Africa is one. So if you're a Somalilander and you want to go to South Africa on your passport issued by the Somaliland government, it is recognised in South Africa, but it's not recognised in Namibia and many other African countries. So they've managed to reach bilateral agreements, but it's very difficult. And there's constantly a fuss within Somaliland's case because Somalia is gradually getting back on its feet. And recently, for example, control of Somaliland's airspace, which had been governed from, I think, Kenya for the last several decades, was handed back to Mogadishu. And there was an uproar in Somaliland because they said, well, look, what about us? Well, you know, we should control our space. So it's very difficult, very difficult.
Thank you. And very last question before the big show starts.
The pounds of the island of Man, you can pay. You can pay with the pounds in London, for example. Is it 1-to-1?
It is 1-to-1, yes. If you try and buy a packet of cigarettes with our Isle of Man cash money in a small shop, they'll probably refuse to take it. But it is legal tender in the UK, so yes, they should take it. But the same happens with Scottish pound notes. They issue their own pound notes, the Bank of Scotland. And sometimes you can spend them in a big supermarket, and sometimes you can't. They say, oh, no, we can't take those.
For example, here in Prague, I saw many exchanges have different rates for Scottish and English pounds.
Do they? Do they? Oh, that's interesting. Yes. Yeah. Well, if they accepted Isle of Man pounds, they'd probably have another rate again, a much lower rate. But I mean, it should be parity. It should be 1-to-1. It is officially 1-to-1.
So thank you very much, Nick. Thank you that you accepted the invitation. And all of you are invited to Golden Coin auction that starts here slightly after 8. It will be big fun, and you can get very unique Golden Coin with Julian Assange. So please come and join us at 8. Thank you.